Namaste Atirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukha Sarupaya Swami Neta Paharine. The subject of my talk this morning will be women who helped Swami Vivekananda in his mission. I tend to go over, so I kept notes. No. Swamiji's tendency to plunge into meditation throughout his life was thwarted again and again by Sri Ramakrishna because he had a mission. He said at the end of his life, "I have said everything, I have done everything." He referred to the work entrusted to him by Sri Ramakrishna. What was his mission? To spread the universal ideas of Sri Ramakrishna, and for that he needed instruments, a machinery. So he wanted to create a mutt, a monastery for totally dedicated women and totally dedicated men. He also wanted a sangha of devotees, an international network of Vedanta centers. How is it possible in a short life of less than 40 years? It was possible because people helped him. And many of these people were women. So I wanted to talk to you about them today. First and foremost, Holy Mother understood all of Swamiji's schemes and gave them her unqualified support. In answer to the doubts of some of his brother disciples, she declared that they were in complete conformity with the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna. She sanctioned his program of selfless service to humanity, and in Varanasi, she gave her full support to the work in the hospital there. After the passing away of Sri Ramakrishna, she went on a pilgrimage and saw in Bodh Gaya the monastery in which the inmates were protected under the umbrella of an ashram and helped one another. And she thought of Sri Ramakrishna's monastic disciples scattered throughout India without proper clothing, without food, often falling sick and unable to help one another. So she prayed for a monastery, that they would all come under the umbrella of a monastery and be able to save their energy for the great work that was ahead of them. When Swami Vivekananda wanted to sell the property of the Belur Math, when there was plague in Calcutta, she prevented him. She said, "You have no right to sell this property. The property is in my name. Sadhus can't own property." So she also thought that in the future, the mutt would be of greater service to humanity than the service of one plague incident. Now, she continued to guide and support Swamiji's work and treated his Western disciples as her own children. So she supported all of his work, and when he was asking for her blessings, whether he should go to America to be a member of the Parliament of Religions convention, she fully gave her consent and blessings to him. She saw, when she was in Nilambar Babu's garden house, a vision of Sri Ramakrishna dissolving into the Ganga, and Swamiji sprinkling that water on the heads of multitude of people, and instantly they would be liberated. So having mother's support was Swamiji's main support, but he had the help of many people wherever he went. His plan was eventually to create a monastery for women first. He said, first mother and mother's daughters, then father and father's sons. What he understood was that there would be much more work for women. So that should be essentially started first. But it couldn't happen first, because the condition of women was not such that they could come out and do that work. It required some years before it could develop. And the work was started by two Western women who had taken novitiate vows. So I'm referring to Sister Nivedita and Sister Christine. They started in Nivedita's school, just in a small school, which they always had the idea would develop eventually into a monastery. But where were the Indian women? As soon as they reached puberty, they would be married off. And so the women would not join in a monastery at that time. It was very difficult to find young girls who would live together in Nivedita school. And what happened was that in 1906, a young woman, actually a girl of 17, Sudhira Basu, at this young age, joined the school as an honorary teacher. Her brother was a monk, Swami Pragnananda, and he encouraged her and cultivated her character when she was still a child. When Sudhira, extraordinarily talented and heroic, joined the school, the women's work of the Ramakrishna order began to take shape. Attracted by her, many young girls came and joined the school. Sudhira was able to demonstrate to them a life of a Hindu nun that Hindu women could identify with. And she was able to attract such women as Prafula Mashima, Usha Mashima, and other outstanding widows and girls. And these women were able to dedicate their lives to the ideals of renunciation and service. Sudhira was a charismatic leader. After the establishment of the Ramakrishna Math for men, it was Sudhira who cultivated the first spiritual leader of Sri Sharada Math for women. there was a young girl, Parul, who was to be married, and her parents wanted to send her to her in-laws' house when she reached puberty. And Parul definitely didn't want to marry. She became a student in Vedanta school, and she told Sister Sudhira that about her problem, and Sudhira helped her to escape from her house in the middle of the night. Because Holy Mother was very worried about this. She said, Sudhira, what have you done? Now you're responsible for that girl's life. But Sudhira was capable of being responsible, and she trained this girl as a nun. The two of them went on pilgrimages, and they were ideal sannyasinis. And eventually, Parul became the first leader of the Sharada Math, and the first president of the Sharada Math. Of course, that was many years later. But as Swamiji, when he went to the West, at every step, women came forward to help him. He was a stranger from India. They brought him into their homes, treated him as their own son, and Swamiji spent most of his life's energy in establishing his message and training his disciples in the West. He said, my work will be more in the West, thence it will react in India. Because he knew that if he worked directly in India, it wouldn't impress Indians at first. They couldn't understand. But if he had established a name for himself in the West, then people would respect that. People in India would respect it. So even before he set foot in America, he was on the train from Vancouver going to Chicago. He met Kate Sanborn. Kate Sanborn was the first American woman to offer to help Swamiji. And Kate Sanborn was quite capable. She was a well-known journalist, very popular journalist, and humorous writer. She, in fact, took the column of, excuse me, I have to drink some water. She took over the column of Mark Twain, who was such a well-known writer. And so she knew many influential people. And she told Swamiji that if you visit my house, I will be able to introduce you to people who will help you in your mission. And Swamiji didn't want to take her up on it at first. His aim was to go directly to Chicago and get enrolled as a delegate to the Parliament. So he went on to Chicago, and then he found that he didn't have enough money, he didn't have proper clothing, and it was impossible for him to live there much longer. There was still quite a lot of time before the Parliament was to start. It was still summer. And the Parliament was to start in September. So Swamiji then decided that he must Oh, sorry. It will become all right after a while. He decided he must take up Kate Sanborn's offer, and so he informed her that he was coming. And then Miss Sanborn, became very excited and busy because all the people she wanted to introduce to Swamiji were away on vacation. It was still summertime. So she wrote letters frantically to all her friends, telling them that they must come immediately and meet this wonderful person from India who was to be her guest. And people did come, and she was able to get Swamiji some speaking engagements. First, to a women's club, and then to a women's penitentiary in Framingham, Massachusetts. I have seen that penitentiary. It's a very modern penitentiary. And Swamiji was impressed that the women there, who may have committed not very serious crimes, but they were, they were rehabilitated very beautifully. They were given an education, and they had a lot of good facilities for them, so that they were able to live normal lives when they came out of the penitentiary. And he had never seen anything like that before. So then Kate Sanborn introduced him to her cousin, Franklin Sanborn. Franklin Sanborn was one of the founders of the Concord School of Philosophy. That was the first really, truly American school of philosophy, I could say. They consisted of transcendentalists like Thoreau and Emerson, and such naturalist people. Hopeless. Well, then Frank Sanborn, who was a well-known philosopher, was able to introduce Swamiji to Professor Wright of Harvard University. And it was Professor Wright who gave Swamiji the credentials he needed to be a delegate at the Parliament, because he came with nothing. He just came knowing that he wanted to be a delegate at the Parliament, but he had no institution supporting him, and no one giving him an introduction. So this Professor Wright was the one who had written a letter to the authorities at the Parliament that this man is more learned than all of our professors put together. And asking him for credentials is like asking the sun for its right to shine. So with that sort of an introduction, he was given permission to become a delegate. Then Swamiji went on from Kate Sanborn's house, again to Chicago. But when he finally got to Chicago, he found that he had, though he had now had credentials, he had no place to stay. He lost the address of the place where he was to stay. So again, Swamiji was in difficulty. He was wandering through the streets of Chicago trying to find a place to stay. And it was Mrs. Hale who saw Swamiji sitting helpless on the sidewalk and just not knowing what to do because he had no place to stay and he was exhausted. He couldn't walk anymore around the city looking for the parliament or someone to help him. And so this Mrs. Hale, who lived across the street from where he happened to be sitting, saw him sitting there dejected and understood that he must be a delegate to the parliament. So she invited him into her house, and without hesitation, she treated him like a son in the family. And and eventually her husband met him and was very much impressed by him. And this was so unusual for that time because that time there was so much prejudice against dark-skinned people, and to take a colored man into their house was a really big step, a big risk for these people, for the criticism of their neighbors. But the Hale family became so close to Swamiji that he made that house his permanent address, and any letters that he received throughout his stay in America would go to that house. That was his permanent address. And if he received any money from anyone, he would go to his hostess and just put the money in her lap, and she would keep it for him. So this was the case until Swamiji became a success in the parliament, and then he, after becoming a success, was wanted everywhere. He went. He joined the offer of a of a lecture bureau. The lecture bureau took advantage of him and paraded him around the country like a clown, giving lectures here and there, and he often had to sleep in the trains. He had no time or place for rest, and they just overworked him and underpaid him. So Swamiji had to get away from that lecture bureau at last. He was then able, when he was invited by a Sarah farmer who heard his lectures at the parliament, and she had a large plot of land in southern Maine and wanted to continue the lectures, the kind of work that was done in the Parliament of Religions, and have a kind of Parliament of Religions in that country place, Green Acre, where she started a summer camp. And Swamiji spoke there. There he was able to find some young people who were interested in that kind of a natural environment and camp. Some of them lived in tents, some in a larger house, a hotel. And Mrs. Olibull, a very wealthy and influential woman who lived near Harvard, also joined her in this endeavor. So Sarah Farmer and Mrs. Olibull ran this summer camp, which was a continuation of the Parliament of Religions, and Swamiji spoke there. Well, sometimes he spoke outside, Indian style, all sitting on the ground under a very large, spreading tree. There were huge pine trees there, and there are some pictures of those pine trees. So that original tree no longer exists, but we have seen the place where it was, a very large area and a wooded area. And so Swamiji spoke Indian style with all these students around him, and he began to feel that he now had something to teach in America. He had a message for these people also, and that they were prepared for this, many of them. Some of them had heard of the Bhagavad Gita and even studied the Bhagavad Gita before meeting Swamiji. Some of them had read translations of the Upanishads which were circulating among the educated people at that time in New England. It was because there was a theosophist who was at one time a secretary of Annie Besant, no, not Annie Besant, Madame Blavatsky, the founder of Theosophy. And then he became disillusioned with Theosophy and began teaching. Excuse me. This man, Mohini Chatterjee, nobody seems to have written about him. He knew the Bible very well, so he could make comparisons of the Bhagavad Gita ideas with Christianity. So these people could easily understand Indian thought through that kind of translation and interpretation. So I know that some of Swamiji's disciples had studied that Mohini Mohan's Bhagavad Gita, or attended his classes. So they were, many of them, prepared for Swamiji. And then Swamiji went on from Greenacre and to Mrs. Oli Bull's house. Mrs. Oli Bull introduced Swamiji to many Harvard professors and was able to get him to speak at the Harvard University. And so these classes in Mrs. Oli Bull's house that Swamiji participated in, and also along with Harvard professors, became known as the Cambridge Conferences. The ones in Greenacre were called the Greenacre Conferences of Comparative Religion, and Mrs. Oli Bull's house conferences were called the Cambridge Conferences. They were reported in the daily newspapers with excerpts of the talks. So this made, you see, the air in this place is very difficult for me. Can you open a door? Thank you. Whenever I come into the hall, I start to cough. So that this way Swamiji met William James and other Harvard professors who then introduced Swamiji's ideas into the intellectual society of the universities. Mrs. Ali Bull was very helpful to Swamiji's work, and she eventually gave him money for the Belur Math to build the Belur Math buildings at the beginning, the rectory, and she gave money for Sister Nivedita to start her school. And Mrs. Ali Bull also gave Swamiji a suit of clothes so that people would respect him in America, that he would look proper and not wear the gaudy combinations of clothes that he was wearing before. So, because at one time people were children at least were throwing stones at Swamiji because he looked somewhat curious in his yellow turban and red robes and so on. But then Mrs. Ali Bull continued helping Swamiji for the rest of her life, and she was even Sri Ramakrishna considered by Swami Swahananda to be one of the pillars, the Rasadars of Sri Ramakrishna. Now, one friend of Mrs. Ali Bull was Emma Thursby. Emma Thursby lived in New York, and she was the most famous opera singer in America at that time. And she was able to arrange in the Carnegie Hall a lecture for Swamiji. Now, Carnegie Hall was the biggest music hall, the biggest hall of any event in America at that time. At that time, it seated 1,500 people, which was quite a lot for then. And so Swamiji spoke there, and he also spoke at her parlor talks, which were called Thursby, Emma Thursby, after Emma Thursby. They were called Thursby's Fridays. Every Friday she would invite famous people, thinkers of the time, and she would invite sadhus, Swamiji, and later his brother disciples along with them. So those parlor talks also became well known. Then we come to New York. Swamiji began to have regular classes in New York City. Once he found that people were ready to listen to the ideas of Vedanta, they were eager to hear these thoughts. He started to have regular classes in New York, and he continued that for 2 years. After 2 years, Betty Leggett, who used to sit in the first row, just front, she and her sister would come to all of his classes in New York from quite far away in Dobbs Ferry, which is a bit upstate, and they would eagerly listen to Swamiji's talks. So at the end of 2 years, they wanted to give Swamiji a break in the summer. Now, he really needed to have some sort of a break by that time, being quite exhausted from lecturing since he arrived in America until that time, giving regular classes constantly. So Betty Leggett, who was quite wealthy, married to a successful businessman. She invited him to her country home in Camp Percy. Camp Percy is in a beautiful place, rather north of there, in a forested area. Actually it was a fishing camp, on a crystal clear lake called Lake Christine. And that Swamiji was so relaxed and happy to be in that atmosphere after so many days in the city that he completely relaxed there and regained his health. He used to like to sit at the edge of the lake and meditate early in the morning. And one day he went there and he went to read his Gita in the morning. He told Betty, "I'm going for a walk to read my Gita." And he took his books and sat at the edge of the lake. He went into samadhi, and it turned into nirvikalpa samadhi. His body became like a stone, still, with no response at all. And Betty called him for breakfast. She came out and called, "Swamiji, Swamiji, it's very late. You haven't come for breakfast." No response. She came near and saw he looked immovable like a stone, and she even shook him. Then she thought, after getting no response at all, she became very upset. She started going back to the house crying, saying, "Swamiji has left us, Swamiji has left us." She thought he was dead. Then after some time, everybody ran out and Swamiji came round, and he explained to them what it was, and he became normal again. But he warned them, don't touch me when I'm in that condition. Anyway, the Swamiji's stay in Camp Percy was over. He went to their house in the Catskill Mountains. They owned this large mansion on a vast property, Ridgely Manor. Now, many of you are acquainted with the Ridgely Manor by now. And Ridgely Manor was the only place in America where 3 of Sri Ramakrishna's monastic disciples were at one time. All 3 were together at one time. Swami Vivekananda, Swami Turiyananda, and Swami Abhedananda. And later Swami Saradananda also came there, but separately. Swamiji's talks went on, but informal talks at Ridgely Manor. And Mrs. Leggett was responsible for many things connected with Swamiji. It was she who gave the money for his Samadhi Mandir at Belur Math, and she also arranged for the alabaster bas-relief image of Swamiji in that mandir. She gave Sister Nivedita $1,000 at that time, which was quite a lot at that time, for her school, and in many other ways supported Swamiji and introduced him to influential people. One of them was Madame Calvé, who was a friend of hers. Madame Calvé was another opera singer, famous in Europe, as Emma Thursby was in the US. Madame Calvé was famous all over Europe as the opera singer. So then Madame Calvé also was helpful to Swamiji later on when he wanted to return to India from Europe. She went all across Europe with him, Eastern Europe also, and then he was by that time not very well and wanted to return to India. So she gave him the fare to return to India. And though she was a Catholic and could not leave her Catholic religion, but she was always true to Swamiji's ideas and ideals, and was a great friend to him. She also introduced him to Jules Bois, a French, actually I think he was a writer, but anyway, he was a French intellectual with whom Swamiji stayed, and from whom Swamiji learned to speak French when he was in France. Swamiji was very close to the Betty Leggett and her husband. He had even attended their wedding when their wedding in Europe, in I think it was in France, I'm not sure. But Swamiji then continued to be in contact with their family through Josephine MacLeod, who was Betty Leggett's sister. Josephine MacLeod insisted that she was Swamiji's friend, not his disciple. And though in some ways she regretted being his disciple, but she was actually closer to him as his friend. She was always cheerful and supportive of Swamiji. She would get money from, actually she didn't have money, she had her sister's money, but she would often spend her sister's money on projects for Belur Math. She was able to get the cows, good Jersey cows, shipped to Belur Math, and at the very beginning. And she went later around the whole world as a kind of ambassador to Swamiji and his teachings. She met all famous and influential people and introduced them to Swamiji's ideas, often giving them Swamiji's writings, published writings, and influencing society as much as she could. Then I didn't mention to you Miss Dutcher, though she was not a great disciple of Swamiji. She hardly understood Swamiji's ideas, but she was a student of Swamiji, and she invited Swamiji to her house in the summer of 1895. And at that time, Swamiji had gathered a number of close students, young students, who he thought might be able to continue his work when he left to go back to India. So he brought all these students there, and his talks there, daily talks, and sometimes talking all through the night. He was so inspired there that his talks were later published as inspired talks. He would teach them from various scriptures and inspire them. And some of the highest teachings were given there. He eventually initiated some 5 people into brahmacharya there, and to two people he gave sannyas. They had Viraja Homa, and these ceremonies were done right there. near that cottage. So that cottage is now still, it was rediscovered in 1946, 1945, 46, and purchased in 1946 for the Vedanta Center. In fact, Swami Vivekananda said that that house must be purchased, even though it was completely dilapidated when it was found. It was going to be sold for timber for $50. And then it had to be renovated completely. But now that house is still a retreat center of the New York Vedanta Center. And so Swami Vivekananda told Swami Nikhilananda that time, Swami Vivekananda was president, he said, you must buy that house no matter what, because I'm going to visit that house. If I don't visit it in my body, I'll visit it in my subtle body after my death. So you must buy it. So anyway, that house also we can visit. Then Swamiji went to California also, and he met the several devotees there. Josephine MacLeod had a brother who passed away while she was at Ridgely Manor with Swamiji, and so she went out to California first. And she, as she left, Swamiji told her, get up some classes and I'll come. So she did. She asked some people with whom the woman with whom she was staying, and he was invited to come there and have some classes. And he also met the Mead family, the Mead sisters in Pasadena, Southern California, and Alice Mead, one of the sisters became a kind of secretary to Swamiji at that time. And he scolded her a lot, but she became like kind of scold-proof. One time she was being scolded, and another woman walked into the room. Swamiji stopped scolding her for the moment. So she said, Swamiji, don't mind Miss Aspinall. You can continue scolding me as you were. It's all right. She was so detached by that time. And another of the sisters, Carrie Mead, was going down the stairs. That small house in Pasadena, we have seen it, just a small residential house, and a narrow staircase. She was coming down the stairs behind Swamiji, and she missed her step. She was about to fall on top of Swamiji. She put out her hand on his shoulder so that she won't just fall on top of him. And as soon as she touched him, she wanted to apologize, but she couldn't say a word because by touching him, so much bliss entered her body. She just felt overwhelmed with bliss that she couldn't speak a word. Such was the power of Swamiji. And there are many other people. I think today I'm going to go overtime. So I just quickly mentioned Miss Henrietta Muller, who was for a short time with Swamiji, an English woman, with whom Swamiji stayed for some time, and it was she who gave the money for the Belur Math property. And then Mother Sevier, also in England, the Sevier couple gave up everything after knowing Swamiji and attending his classes. They gave up everything and sold all their property, everything, but they wanted to give it to Swamiji for starting a center in the Himalayas, because they came to know that Swamiji wanted to have an ashram in the Himalayas where his Eastern and Western disciples together could live and meditate. Mrs. Sevier and Mr. and Mrs. Sevier wanted to give him the money for that, and Swamiji said, no, you hold on to the money. We will use it for that ashram. And then they bought that Mayavati ashram, the whole hill, with that money. And Mrs. Sevier lived there. Mr. Sevier passed away early, but Mrs. Sevier continued to live there with all wild animals and around her. But she was a very courageous woman. And she also helped Swamiji, Swamiji's message, by helping Swami Vivekananda, who was then in charge of the ashram in the hills, that when he was writing the life of Swami Vivekananda, that life of Vivekananda, according to his Eastern and Western disciples, was very much edited by her with Swami Vivekananda. And so she did a great deal of work for Swamiji. Now, it's nearly 12 o'clock, so I will end here. Swamiji said, the mother dropped me in a strange world, among strange people who do not understand me and whom I do not understand. But the longer I stay here, I have come to feel that some of the people in the West whom I have met belong to me, and they are also here to serve with me the work assigned to me. His Western disciples were no doubt heroic, but so were his Indian disciples. And it seems that the avatar of this age came to erase the differences between man and man, Eastern and Western, man and woman. Swami Adbhutananda, Latu Maharaj, remarked about Swamiji's Western disciples. Have these Westerners become great so easily? They do not sit idly, but are active all the time. They are heroes of action. Seeing their good work, God has made them great. If you want to be great, work like them. Then God's grace will descend on you. So Swamiji was helped very much more by so many Western women who were able to help him at that time. And so now I'd like to end this talk because it's now 12 o'clock. So, Namah Shri Atirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukha Sarupaya Swamine Tapaharine. Sorry for my cough. What can I do? Now we will have a song or two.